I figured the best players in the country might have a little bit of an ego sometimes with how the coaching should be done. Did you ever have any issues with, your players and, hey,
Of course,
you should be doing this?
they
How
all,
did
they
you react
all,
to that?
they all knew more than I did.
We get to interview Dick Gould, who's the Stanford University former head men's tennis coach, won 17 titles for Stanford out in Palo Alto, California. Absolute legend of the game, legend of tennis. I don't quite know how we landed. No, I know exactly how we landed him. Thank you to Bruce Gullickson. He's like, hey, you should interview Dick. I'm like, let's do it. And was like, hey, Bruce, you want to do it with me? And Bruce is like, sure, let's do it. Sorry, Dave. Got the boot to the minors. Bruce promoted to the majors to interview Dick. I crammed for like 3 hours before this interview, just really diving deep. But super interesting guy, and it was a pleasure chatting with him. Hopefully you enjoy the interview. Bruce, is there a light just like shining right on your head?
Let me see if I can close this window here.
It's not
I know
that big
I'm
of a
very
deal,
angelic, Isaac, but
yeah.
let's see.
I know that people are gonna want to see your face, so like I just got to do this. Have to say it. So
is that any better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah,
that's
much better.
Yeah. All
Perfect.
right. Yeah.
Oops, the closer you get the screen, the more you get whited out.
All right, I'll stay
that's
back.
That's actually better. That's much better.
Yeah, let's get right into it. We get to interview Dick Gould, who is the former University of Stanford or Stanford University men's and women's tennis coach out in Palo Alto. Bruce connected us with you, Dick. So I was like, why not have Bruce on, provide a little bit of insight that I maybe can't, and some expertise. So I thought this would be a really, really good, I guess, social circle. But anyways, welcome to the show, Dick.
Thanks, Isaac. Nice to be here. And correction, I was a men's coach. I wasn't the women's coach.
My apologies on that. And
my wife was the first one of those at Stanford.
Okay. Yeah.
And how did you initially get into, the great sport of tennis?
I didn't want to play tennis. I came from a farming town in Southern California, Ventura, oil and farming, and none of my buddies played tennis. But about 11 years old, my folks said, well, Richard, I think we think it's about time you have a tennis lesson. I said, what? Wear those little white pants around town and stuff? I like my Levi's, my boots. And they said, well, do you want to ride your horse this summer? I said, yes. I said, well, then you better try a tennis lesson. I said, okay, you got me. I'll try one. So then I go to this lesson, and the lesson ahead of mine, I was waiting for my time with the court to open up, and lesson ahead of mine, the two little twins, they're about 14 years old. I'm 11. The hormones are just starting, and one of them, they were both wearing hot pants and halter tops. I thought, wow, this sport's got something, at least, and still really, really dubious about it. But the lesson, the pro was really, really inspiring. He made everything I did exciting. He equated it all to a separate sport. He said, you step into the head like Rocky Marciano, who's then heavyweight champ of the world, steps into a punch. You watch the ball like Ralph Kiner watches it come out of the pitcher's hand. Actually, Ralph Kiner ended up marrying his daughter a number of years later, small world. But Harold Chafee was his name. He was a great pro. His daughter was a world-class player in the international circuit. And he got me going. I couldn't put a racket down ever since that first ball. I made every ball I hit exciting, which helped me a lot in my teaching, because I started out as a teaching pro and teaching high school. And it really helped me because I knew I had to make the lesson exciting. And most kids are there not because they want to be there, because their parents would be a nice thing to do, nice sport to learn. So that was my challenge.
Yeah, what was it about the sport that you really attached yourself to? Because obviously tennis is a pretty complex sport.
Well, I came back from that lesson and couldn't put my racket down. I went out. We had a gravel driveway, small gravel, and I couldn't stop trying to hit the ball against the garage. And I never could beat the garage. So I was fascinated. I try, but I never won a match against the garage. It always won. But the challenge of hitting against the garage, keeping the ball going, especially coming off the gravel, was something that I really enjoyed. And
Did you
then
break any windows, Dick? That's how I learned my drop shot. I broke a window, and I learned I better.
where I'm sure I would have found them. But then I went in. That was summer before I started junior high school, and about a month later, I started it, and I was in a PE class, and they had a block. The first block I had was tennis, beginning tennis, in this PE class that everyone had to take. And there I met one of my best buddies in the future, another teaching pro and great tour coach, Tom Shivington. And so we played all through junior high school and high school together, which was nice.
And did you play high school at a specific high school in California?
Yeah, at Ventura, and it was we had a fair team. It wasn't a tennis town per se, but Harold Chafee was a great coach and got a lot of kids started. And then when I went to high school, the high school B basketball, JV basketball coach was also a tennis player. He had played at USC in LA.
Wow.
And he was a great coach and great player as well. And so I was very lucky. I had two really, really good coaches starting out. The one who started me, and then the one I had through high school.
And then
Arnold Saul.
And then you went and attended Stanford as well as a college. How was your experience there?
Well, freshmen could not play in the varsity in those days in any sport in the NCAAs. So there was a freshman team. I think I was number 5 on the freshman team. So I wasn't great, but I could never play all year long as a junior. The tournaments in Southern California, mostly in LA, that was a little over an hour drive away. I didn't really have transportation. My parents either took me or whatever, but I did. And I also was always working in the summer on the farm. So I couldn't play summer. I could only play part-time during the year, and I always played basketball in the winter months. And so I was really about a 3-month player. So I went to Stanford without that much experience against guys who'd grown up playing 12 months a year in Southern California, all the great tournaments and other places. And I was way behind them. But playing every day, and it gets good competition each day, I got better. And all year long for the first time, all school year long, 9 months. And I got a lot better. So by the end I got out of Stanford, I was number 3 on a good team and worked my way up into a pretty good position. And I knew I was going to be in coaching by that time. So I was a physical education major at Stanford, and I was looking to probably go into become a Parks and Rec director of some city, some town. And PE was the closest thing to it as a major that Stanford had. But I got hooked on the coaching bit. It really, really appealed to me. I thought you had to be an All-American to be a coach, and I wasn't an All-American. And but my coaches told me you don't have to be. You just have to be a good student of the game. And my coach at Stanford said the same thing. He said, I said what I was going to do. Bob Ranker, longtime coach at Stanford, and he said, well, you really should get a job with the security of being a high school teacher, coach. That's good. But then you have to have a job on the side in the summers and the weekends where you can make some money to complement your teaching salary. You also want to be a pro at a club. And at that time, the late 50s, early 60s, the club sports boom, family club sports boom, tennis clubs were really booming in the Northern California area around Stanford. I think there were, must be 10 or 15 clubs within 7 miles of Stanford. And so when I got out, I applied to 3 clubs to be the pro. I knew they had openings, just starting out, brand new clubs. And I was offered jobs at all 3 of them. And I took a job at one that was close to where I lived and where I was teaching high school, so it worked out beautifully. After 2 years of high school coaching, which I really enjoyed, and teaching in the classroom, a job opening at a brand new junior college named Foothill College. And I was all tennis. I had nothing there but teaching tennis for PE classes and for the men's team. And so I took that job. I was also very near the club I was teaching, about a mile away from the club. And that was a dream job between the two of them. And I would have probably would have stayed at Stanford at Foothill till I retired, except that my coach at Stanford retired in my fourth year at Foothill College. We had won 2 state championships, so I was known in the area pretty much as a coach and what was happening. And the tennis boom was just starting. I was kind of riding that crest. And so the job at Stanford opened up. I applied for it, and I got it. And I immediately told everyone, I think we can win a national championship. And I got the job because of that, probably. I said that Stanford hadn't won any championships in anything at that time, and so for a long time. So everyone kind of laughed at me on the side, and even my own players, when I told them, well, guys, we're going to win the national championship, looked at me like I was crazy. And they said, Coach, we'll never win a national championship here at Stanford, let alone in tennis. And we were always pretty good, but never in the top echelon. At that time, there were no indoor clubs really throughout the country, very many. A few armories had them in Chicago and New York, but not very many indoor clubs. So college tennis was mostly built around the Sunshine States areas, SC, UCLA, and Los Angeles, Trinity in Texas, San Antonio in Texas, Miami, places where they had more, but not brutal winters so much. Mm-hmm. So it was a pretty limited thing when I started, and there wasn't much recruiting in those days. You know, you just no such thing as really as home visits, and so I figured to get started, I had to get out there and meet some of these kids because I wasn't known beyond the local community very much. So I went to Kalamazoo, Michigan, the national championship, my first year of coaching. And it was a meat market, watching the coaches go up to these kids and putting their arm around them, say, hey, yeah, Johnny, that was a great match. Oh, yeah, you're going to be a great player. If you come here to my university, I can help you, and you're going to go on to greatness for sure. And I just turned my stomach, seeing a line of coaches lined up every time a player came off the court. I never went back to Kalamazoo after that. But I figured out a way, Isaac, to bring players into Stanford. The USTA then had, I think they still do have, but they had national training camps for their junior teams where they selected a team at the very start of the summer. And we had 2 big tournaments, one in San Jose, which is about 20 miles to the south of Stanford, and one in Burlingame, 20 miles to the north. Burlingame was a national hardcourt championship, a national championship for 18 and 16 years old players. And so most of the players in the country would start their summer with that tournament. And San Jose State was the California State Championship the week before that. A lot of players played that as a warm-up to Burlingame. So I wrote to USTA, said, well, we could have this training camp at Stanford just before those camps start. By the time those tournaments started, school was out for a couple of weeks. There's about a 2-week break in there. So they said, okay, good. And I was lucky because one of my members of the club who I taught tennis to was the president of Transamerica Corporation at the time, a big corporation. And they agreed to sponsor the Junior Davis Cup camp. So here I am in a situation where the USTA was picking out the top 20 kids in the country based on last year's ranking in the 18-unders and the top 10 and 16-unders, and paying their way to come to Stanford for a week and a half of training, after which they would stay on and go to the Cal State tournament and the Burlingame tournament, which started this summer. While at the camp, they would fight for places to make the national team, which became the junior team of 6 or 8 players that went straight to Junior Wimbledon and so on in the summertime, and was sponsored by the USTA throughout the summer, all expenses. So no kid in the country could afford to not attend this camp because that's the only place where they had these selections. I think the only kid that didn't attend this camp, which we held for 2-3 years at Stanford, was Eddie Dibbs, but all the other top players were there, every one of them. And that's where I got to know the players because I was the host of the camp. I wasn't the coach who was the guy staying in the dorms and waking them up every morning when they didn't want to get out of bed, who was having them do the on-court drills and was coaching them all summer long. I wasn't their traveling coach. And the camp coach was Barry McKay, a great player, former #1 in the country.
Golden Bear, right?
He played at Michigan. Yeah, Barry, yeah. Great player from the University of Michigan. And he was really a good man, and he was the coach of these players, and they played off to make this team, and the team was announced at a big banquet at the end of the camp, and then they went to the tournaments that were local and went then on to the national tournaments. So that was how I got to know these players. They got to know me, and they got to know Stanford a little bit. And finally, after a couple of years of trying, I got one of these guys to come to Stanford, Roscoe Tanner, and he was the first really great player. Stanley Paswell before that, but before we had the camps. But Charlie Paswell's brother, who was a good player, and Roscoe came to Stanford. He's like a Pied Piper. The kids in the junior circuit loved him, and he was the guy that kind of first guy to take a chance on the idea that, come here, Roscoe, you can be the first to do this. You can go to some place where they win it all the time, but you can be the guy that turns this all around. And to his credit, he did.
Yeah. So how soon thereafter did guys start following him?
Well, right away. Right away. We had another really good local player came in who ended up getting the semifinals of the NCAA that year, his last year in college in 1973. Rick Fisher. Gary Grollemon a year younger, but in the top 10 in the 16 unders, came to Stanford that year as well. So it was a good start. And from that time on, we finally won one after 7 years of trying.
Yeah, and that's what you attribute the most of your or the bulk of your success is to that camp, and
Yeah, like that, because I didn't know anyone. If you were a parent, would you entrust your kid to someone with no reputation? Not a great player on the circuit or anything like that. Would you trust your kid's future in tennis and to someone you don't know and never heard of? So this was really nice because they had my job to be sure they had a great experience at Stanford. So, and they did during that visit. We went to San Francisco, went to giant baseball games. They got to know the area really well and see the interest in tennis in the area. And that was my job, to be sure that it really showed up. Stanford really showed off well. Local areas showed off well.
What kind of culture things did you do to, drive morale and make sure that the guys are in a cohesive team?
Well, that's interesting. I didn't really know myself what I did. And at that point, when I got through coaching, and I coached 38 years at Stanford. And then I became director of tennis, retired in that position for 14 years. And when I stopped that after 52 years, a guy had asked me about halfway through my coaching career at Stanford. He said, "Coach, how come you win so much?" And I said, "Well, Jack, I get the best players." And he's in the Baseball Hall of Fame at UCLA. He's an athlete himself, a very competitive person, the head of a big corporation, founder of a big corporation in Silicon Valley. He said, "Dick, I've been around too long, sport and otherwise. You don't just get the best players. Some way they have to turn into a cohesive team and so on." I said, "Well, Jack, I stand by that answer." But that bothered me because I couldn't really answer that. He said, "And you sustained it for a long time. How'd you do that?" And I think we won 17 championships after we won that first one in the next 28 years. And I hadn't really thought too much about it till they asked me. So when I finally had time and retired from coaching and from Stanford, then I thought, I'm going to write my guys, because I'd stayed in pretty good contact with all of them. And there were 200 who were still alive. A few of them had passed by then. But I sent a questionnaire of 20 questions out to all 200 of them, essay questions like, did we have a culture, to answer your question? How important was this trust? Why do you think we won for so long? I sent a follow-up question at the very end, about a standalone question, because I thought it'd be kind of add some humor. And that was that, when did you see Coach maddest? When was Coach the maddest? I got some really interesting answers on that question. But it took about 2 hours to fill out this form. And 83% of the players, 166 of the 200 responded to this. And I was really flattered by that. And in my workplace, my new workplace, I put these answers up to each question on the wall from chronologically, cut them out and pasted. I had almost 2,000 pages of answers by that time. And plus my wall, and I looked at them and I rearranged them a little bit. And for saying, no, I said, these are actually, if I rearrange the names of the questions a little bit and organize a little better, these are actually chapters for a book. Maybe I should write a book on this. So that led to the book called Anatomy of a Champion, which just had its second printing at the end of last year, 2024. And Anatomy of a Champion in Sport, Business, and Life. And it turned out to be a book on leadership. I didn't intend to write a book, but these answers prompted me to, because there are things there that I couldn't define myself, but my players could define them for me. What was their actual player? There's something like 60 or 80,000 leadership books out there on the market internationally. It's a pretty tried and stale subject, frankly. But this was not me saying, like Jack Welch, these are the 10 keys to leadership, or these are the 8 things you must do to be a successful leader, or whatever it was. These were coming from my players. What was most important to them? Was there a secret sauce? I thought there might be a secret sauce, one thing they all rallied about, but there were about 20, 25 things that were different. Someone would say, to me, this was the most important thing, or this is why we were so good for so long, or they range from culture to all kinds of things.
Can you talk about balance a little bit, Dick? 'Cause I know one of the things you said is you guys didn't necessarily work as much as some of the other teams, but you had more balanced lifestyle for some of your players. Let them be kids on the weekends occasionally.
Well, I think that's really important. I was young. I started out. I wasn't much older than the players. I was in my 20s when I started coaching at Stanford, my late 20s. And so, I was close enough to be able to relate to these guys, and that can be a danger or it can be okay. And somewhere rather it turned out to be okay, but I could really enjoy them on their level rather than if I'd started when I was 50 or 60. Although many coaches can do that. It was nice getting on the ground floor with them, trying to build something. I think to me it was important that they be ready to play at the end of the year. This is the second half of the first question that was really important. Why did we win so many titles? What the Jed asked about how could we sustain it for so long? And to me, it's because we were able to be fresh at the end of the year. NCAA rules at the time permitted 4 hours of practice a day, and you could practice 6 days a week. You had to take 1 day off. Well, we never practiced on the weekend except the weekend before the NCAA championship, unless we had 2 days of play on the weekend. We didn't overschedule. We didn't play that many matches. We played our conference matches and just a few strategically placed non-conference matches, but not a lot of matches. And as the guys got better, they were playing all summer anyway. The last thing I needed to do was tire them out. In fact, in the fall, we played no matches. And there weren't any fall tournaments then for the college players as there are now. The fall is taken up by individual play all fall long. And when we first started doing that in college tennis, with a couple of the first All-American tournaments, the only tournament that falls to time for college players, I refused to go as a coach. I had 10 guys, 11 guys at home. I couldn't leave them with no assistant coaches in those days at home and take 1 or 2 guys to the tournament. So I wouldn't even go to the tournament. I just send them on their own. And that was a time where you could sit back for 3 months and work on the games, Bruce, and take something apart. And it's pretty hard to do that in the middle of a season. You can't really change a grip on something one day and expect to be using a match the next day. And they're playing.
I know our own David Wheaton credits you a lot for his game and his development and his time.
David was a great player before he came here. Obviously, everyone thinks of the class coming out of the juniors that year of Agassi and Sampras and Chang and Courier, but they forget David Wheaton, who got to 12 in the world and semifinals of Wimbledon. He was a heck of a player. And then I had probably I was a serve and volley player, not a great ground stroker. I couldn't stay back into 3 balls in the court probably, so that's probably why I was a serve and volleyer. But I really felt tactically that it was important to be proactive rather than reactive. And so all my guys, when they came to Stanford, had to incorporate serve and volley at any time in the match, if not the whole match, as a part of their game. Attacking the second serve, putting pressure on the second serve. Guys are playing close to the baseline in those days. The courts were a little quicker. The strings were not, they didn't hold the ball as well as they do now. The balls were a little livelier. So it's some advantage to getting to net more than there is nowadays, perhaps. And so my whole job was taking these kids. Many of them had good net play, but were not physically strong enough to use it and put it in a regular part of their game, or to all of a sudden start using it in competition. So in the fall, I could build this part of their game up. So when the season came, anytime I asked them to serve the ball, they could do it. Might be the first game, might be in certain points, might be in second serve, might be always on first serve. And we worked on it really, really hard. And some of them even need to work on their technique. They hadn't done much serving ball. I know Alex O'Brien said, well, coach, before he came to Stanford, I came to net to shake hands or pick up balls. and David Wheaton was one of those. I mean, he big gangly guy. His fort was at net. But at the time, he didn't know it. He was probably just physically able to start doing it. But the transition between high school and college, he hadn't really incorporated in his game. Even McEnroe was basically, if you didn't force him to net, he did play Wimbledon and got the semifinals before he came to Stanford, serving and volleying on grass. But on grass in those days, you had to do that. And he was very talented at that. But he would have just stayed back on the slower courts, the hard courts, and just rallied and come to net most of the time if he hadn't been pushed to come in all the time, which, of course, was the key to his game, turned out.
Your questionnaire that you sent out to your players, and the last question was, when was the time that I made you most mad? So what was their response when you asked that? What was the most common response?
Well, Roscoe Tanner said that the time he saw me most mad is when I threw him up against the fence in front of a crowd at UCLA because he was playing not to lose. It was third place playoff for the Pac-10 championship or conference championship. But no, they did away with third place playoffs. But I take a lot of pride because we never lost one. I didn't want my guys to just say, oh, we didn't win it, so we're going to quit, and just show up for the match and not really treat it as a match you want to win. Roscoe was going through the motions. The whole team was getting beat. But they were looking at Roscoe's leadership and seeing what he was doing. So I took him and just kind of threw him against the back fence. Let's see what, little things. So one guy said, I remember one time he was all swearing at practice. One guy swears and he starts swearing. So I took them all into the bathroom, the public bathroom at the courts. I said, get behind a urinal or a toilet, guys. And they went, what the hell is coach doing? I said, can I take a big breath? Now flush it. And they looked at me. I said, good, you got out of the system. Let's go back to practice. Another guy mentioned when they were throwing rackets on the court. One guy throws a racket and all of a sudden everyone starts throwing rackets. It happens. So I said, hold up, guys. Come with me. Bring your racket with you. So we go on the track right behind the field, just behind our courts, and started on the goal line. I said, okay, guys, you get a 10-yard start, run up and throw it as far as you can and landing on the grass underneath the racket. And they looked at me and, okay, now. And they did it. And they looked at me again and said, now go get it. And went and got him, lined up again, had him throw it back. We did it back and forth about 3 or 4 times. And they came back and didn't throw a racket in the court for a week. One time they were swearing and another time again. And I said, come with me, guys. They went out behind the courts and I said, okay, I want you to take the vilest, worst words you can say. Think of them and yell them as face the wall. So you're not facing anyone else. And yell them as loud as you can, as long as you can. And it starts out really loud. And after about 15 seconds, no one can think of anything else. And it kind of dies down. They're looking at each other, what idiots we are. And that was pretty good. They didn't swear in a court for the next week or so. So, just things like this stuck in these guys' minds. And another guy was talking about, we're playing in NCAA finals. And his dad's sitting aside in the stand right behind the center court in Georgia. And he's playing in that court. And he was playing not to lose in a match that he had to play to win, be more aggressive and not wait for the other guy to miss. And I go put him in a bear hug, and his dad's looking down at me like I'm going to jump out of here and kill you, coach. But he's my number one player, and he turned around and won that match. So it's funny what the guys remember. A lot of them
was McEnroe the best racket thrower?
John was pretty good. He didn't throw his racket that much. He was really good, Bruce, in college. First of all, that's another thing, treating guys individually. In my sport, you can do that because if a guy misses practice or something, it doesn't mess up your offense you're installing for the next team in football, like it would in football and basketball for the next game. So he played in Wimbledon. He played a tournament in the Northeast before coming to college. Bill Reardon had a great indoors tournament, and he was in New York, so he could easily go to many of these and play them after school, after high school, after the day was over. And he did pretty well. I mean, the tournament is mostly United States guys, Arthur Ashe and Charlie Passerelle and Stan Smith. He did pretty well. And that was actually enough. He did well enough to get him into qualifying rounds of main draw at Wimbledon. And then he went to Wimbledon on the junior team, which started in junior Wimbledon starts the second week of Wimbledon. Well, he not only was in qualifying, he qualified for the main draw, which is the first week. And he kept winning, and he was still in the main draw when the junior tournament started. So he never did represent the United States in junior Wimbledon. He went right into the main draw there, and he played the whole. He played right up to the semifinals, and then he was winning. And once in the Pro Tour, especially when you're starting to win points as a junior, you're starting to get a good ranking because you're starting to on a win streak. You don't want to take a week off or a couple of days off. You want to keep it going. Right. You almost have to keep it going. But he did. He hardly took a day off a whole summer long. He's playing singles and doubles in every tournament. And I don't think he missed a tournament all summer long. So when he came to Stanford, I made him take the fall off. Wouldn't let him come on the courts. I knew he was only going to be there 1 year, but I wanted him fresh at the end of the year. So to answer your question specifically, Bruce, I gave him the fall off, wouldn't let him near the courts. He came out a little fresher in the winter, and he was actually really a good citizen all the way up to I was really proud of him. The last home match of the year, he lost his cool a little bit. He was really wanted to win the NCAAs. And the pressure was building as the year went on and on. He'd lost a couple times that year. He lost to Larry Gottfried, who was a nemesis of his. He had lost to Elliot Telcher once. He'd had about 3 losses on his record during the course of the year. He's playing a really good player that last match at home. From Pepperdine, Eddie Edwards from South Africa. Eddie's a really nice guy, the guy you don't normally would really like, but for something, John got out of bed the wrong side that last match, and he didn't behave well. And I didn't make a big deal out of it because he'd been so good all year. He's a great team player. He never missed a Davis Cup match, no matter how tired he was, what part of the world he was playing in. He would always, when asked, play the Davis Cup for the country. And in Stanford tennis, the same way. We had a great team. The defending NCAA champion on that team played number 3 most of the year. And I had them play each other. 3 guys play off for that chance to play one. McEnroe wasn't automatically number 1. How could I tell you a guy had won the whole thing the year before and not give him a chance? Another guy just as good. And McEnroe, John, fortunately beat the other 2 teammates. So he was 2-0, and instead of ending up 1-1, I'd have to make a decision, which would have been really hard for me to do, frankly. John won 2 matches in 3 sets, and so he's number 1. And Billy Mays beat Matt Mitchell, and so he's number 2 in match number 3. But Mac was always the first guy. Our first competition was the team indoors in Wisconsin. He was the first guy on the court if his match was over to console a guy who had lost, beat me on the court to console a guy who had just won his match. He was a tremendous team player. And all year long, but he lost his cool in that home match at Stanford. And when you go to the NCAAs, he was one tighter than a drum. And at Georgia, and typically then, there weren't paid professionals, linesmen then. There were just not even chairmen, people in the chair. They were faculty members who played lunch at noontime that would come out and help the coach out by calling the lines, or people from the local club coming out helping them. So they weren't professional linesmen. They make a lot of mistakes. Not that John was always right. But John was strung so tight. I think he played 14 matches in 8 days in the NCAAs, starting with the individual tournament, which he won, and going into the team tournament, which he won, and then going to the individual tournament. But he misbehaved, and there. And I had a decision to make after the team tournament was over. I didn't want to pull him out of the team tournament because that's not fair to his teammates. He'd worked all year hard too. It took them out of the tournament as well. So I weathered through that, and then I had a decision to make. Do I let him play or not play in the individual tournament? And I decided to stick with him. He'd been so good to me, so loyal to me throughout the year. He'd been so good with his teammates This was an individual tournament to win or lose in his own. I couldn't not give him the chance to play. I could not give him the chance not to play. And I did, and he made it through it okay, barely made it, and won the championship. And I'm so glad that I stuck with him and let him finish it off.
Yeah, you've referenced a lot of players, and Bruce is muted, so I get to hijack the question here. So you've coached a ton of really good players over your time. What characteristics do you see most often in those players?
Well, I think, the biggest thing is heart. And I recruited solely by ranking. I didn't look at potential. And I learned early on that not everyone who was a good tennis player could go to Stanford, could get into Stanford. They had to take the right courses and do wellness courses. But I learned that of the guys who were high school seniors who were going to college, about one of the top 5 in the country could qualify for admission at Stanford it was a realistic candidate for admission at Stanford. And one player in the second 5 in the country was a realistic candidate at Stanford. And every once in a while, there'd be a third guy in the top 10 who might possibly get into Stanford as well. And those were the guys I had to encourage to attend. And those were guys that once they got admitted, I had to get to come to Stanford if I wanted to win a championship. And if I was successful in doing that, and I think we got all but one player that was offered a full scholarship in that range to come to Stanford, then we could win, and we did. But why were they high in the rankings? They might not have been the prettiest player. They might have played a different style of game than I liked. They maybe not have served. Most of them weren't serving volleyers. Only Sandy Mayer and Jim Grab came to Stanford as good accomplished serving volleyers, as an example. I never had to tell them that they knew when to come to net. Then that became really important. And the rankings were what was it that allowed them to win? If you looked at them on a court, public park court, you think, well, this guy's a nice player, but he sure does this funny, or this guy looks funny, or this guy's not as fast as this guy. This guy's hands aren't as good, but they won. And that's how I measured it, by heart. So that to me was the most important thing. I really was heavy on the ranking. I missed some guys that developed late, who had great potential that developed in college, that could have really helped us. But I never went wrong by going with the rankings, the guy who had proven to that point they could win. And the results bore me out, I think, overall.
So Dick, 2 McEnroe questions for you. Was his match with Sadre the greatest college match of all time in the finals?
Well, I don't know about all time. It was certainly one of the great matches. John Sadre was from North Carolina State. Now we're in the ACC, and so J.W. Eisenhower's coach and I are betting on every football game and every tennis match that we play against each other. So we have a standing $10 Starbucks gift certificate in writing in all these competitions.
And is John the best doubles player you've ever seen?
John McEnroe and anyone would have been the best doubles team I've ever seen, I think. But John Sadre, that match was amazing. And that was at the end of, we play 2 out of 3 sets all year, and we get to the finals NCAA after 14 matches in 8 days, 95-degree heat, 90% humidity. John's exhausted. He can barely even walk. And he has to be, and he lost in 3 sets the day before in doubles. He and Billy Mays, his partner, best friends, still are to this day. But they had a little tiff among themselves on the court or something. And they ended up playing singles in a doubles match. They wouldn't even talk to each other. And they ended up losing in the semifinals to a good team, in fairness. But fortunately, you have doubles to play. You only had singles the next day, and because of that loss. And that was a great match. And after 4 sets, it's like 7-6, 6-7, 7-5. I don't know how John won the 3rd set, but he did. And I think 1 service break at that point, something like that. John was Sadre was a big server. He had to be top 15 in the world, and a big basher. And Mac was lying on the court on changeovers on his back on a towel. A trainer came down and stretched out his back. He could not have. I don't think you never say never against John. He's such a great competitor. But I don't see how John ever could have finished a 5th set. Fortunately, he won in a tiebreak in the 4th set and won the match because he was done. But one of the most amazing performances I've ever seen a player.
Yeah.
And did you ever have any like potential issues with I figured the best players in the country might have a little bit of an ego sometimes with how the coaching should be done. Did you ever have any issues with your players and hey,
Of course,
you should be doing this?
they
How
all,
did
they
you react
all,
to
they all knew more than I did. But remember, these are 17-year-old kids who
Right.
all knew more than their parents knew too.
Right.
I think egos is a topic, really very, it turned out to be a big topic in the book. And I think when you think about it in terms of leadership, which a coach is, coach of anything, coach of a business team, coach of a family, your parents, the coach of they're coaching a family team. When you think about leadership, you want on a business team or an athletic team, you got to have people who believe in themselves, really have a big belief in themselves. Sometimes that glass is overfilling so much it's not an accurate belief. And then it's hard to bring a guy down and not destroy him. He's had his dad telling him every day, ties his shoes, you're the best player on this earth. His coach telling him, you're going to really be great, and all of a sudden he realizes, well, maybe there's some out there as good as I am or better. And that's hard for some of them to accept, but they all have big egos. And ego and you want that in your team. You want guys who believe in themselves, and you want guys who can believe in each other, which leads us to the topic of trust. So first of all, you have to trust in your teammates. You have to know they're going to give their best effort, know they're going to prepare their best. You have to believe under pressure, you're going to give it everything they have always. That includes their preparation for it. That's trust is built on all those things. You have to trust in yourself. You have to trust in your coach, and your coach has to trust in you. And egos are in there, and they can get in the way. So my job is to try to balance that. One of the guys said about egos, a pretty big thing, actually. A lot of guys said that was my biggest challenge, and how to deal with egos. And they're very complimentary to how we did that. One of my guys, Billy Mays, said, the way you responded to it was great because you respond to it by not showing any ego yourself. It's one of the hardest teams I ever had to coach is John McEnroe's team, just because the players were that good. In those days, before United States drought in international tennis, on our team alone, like in that 78 team, we had Matt Mitchell was the NCAA champion. He went on to be top 50 in the world. Mac was one in the world singles and doubles. Johnny Rast was on that team, a great player. Perry Wright was number 12 in the final college rankings, a really good player. And then fighting for number 6 in the team were 3 freshmen. Only one of them was going to start. One was Lloyd Bourne. He became top 100 in the player, 100 in the world player. Peter Rennert, who became a top 40 in the world player. And they're fighting for the number 6 spot in that team.
Yeah,
and it was an amazing team, and it was full of egos. And that team was a great team, but there were other good teams out there. UCLA was very, very good that year. Elliot Telscher and Mac had some great matches. Elliot had a couple of match points against Mac. Elliot had match points against Mac and UCLA. And Mac hit the most amazing shot under pressure I've ever seen to stay in that match. And at that point, Elliot kind of wilted in the end of that set in the third. But it's really interesting to me to see how trust and egos are really important in team success. You have to have them, but you have to have it based on realistic and on right reasons. And somehow we managed that pretty well. Fast forward 20 years, and I had a team that really believed in each other and in themselves, but they were totally selfless. Of 3 undefeated teams, these were 2 of them, exactly 20 years apart. And that team, whereas with Mac team, I played my ladder differently every year, selected my lineup differently every year, 38 years, 38 different ways. One year I had everyone play everyone, 12 guys played, 11 others. I mean, it's all was one year I would just pick my lineup, all different kinds of ways. Well, I sat Paul Goldstein, who now is our current coach, was top 100 in the world, highest ranked in collegiate for every year he's in the pros. Brian Walters, a great player, won the collegiate All-American tournament in the fall. The Bryan brothers. And then fighting and playing number 5 and 6 were Alex Kim, a future NCAA singles champion, and Jeff Abrams, a great junior national champion in the 14 and unders, as an example. And the top 4 guys were pretty clear cut ahead of Alex and Jeff at the time, I felt. So I sat them down the day before I had to turn the lineup in for the indoors. And I said, the week before, I said, well, guys, how are we going to select who's number 1? They said, Coach, we don't want to play each other. In fact, someone said, well, Bob Bryant, one of the guys, one of those 4 said, Bob Bryant should be 1. He's playing better than any. He just won Kalamazoo. And Bob said, well, Ryan Walter should be number 1. He just won the All-American tournament a month ago. And then Ryan would say, well, Mike Bryant's playing incredible. And Mike was, well, Paul Goldstein, look, he had the best record of all overall. He won Kalamazoo in the 16s and twice in the 18s. They're all pushing it off on someone else. So we went off there. I said, okay, guys, let me think about it, and I'll come up with something for you tomorrow. We walked up the court. John Whitlinger, great John Whitlinger from back in your area, was my associate head coach. I go, John, how many matches do we have after practice? We're having our coaches meeting. He said, there are 24. So that's interesting because there are 24 matches before the NCAAs. We have 4 guys under consideration. What if we played each of them at number 1 6 times? Each of them at number 2 6 times. They all have played number 4 6 times. And in fact, let's go a step further and let's determine tonight who's going to play number 1 in which matches, who's going to play number 4 in which matches, do the whole lineup right now for the rest of the season. And I say, it's not going to be very popular because whoever's playing number 1, whoever we select now in February to be playing number 1 in the first week in May or the 3rd week in April might be playing 4th best of everybody. Do you think these guys can handle it? I said, well, let's ask them tomorrow. So we did that. The Bryants were from LA. So we went down to Southern California. They played 1 and 2. Ryan Walters from San Jose next to Stanford. So when they come up north to play us and our big matches, big rivalries, then Ryan would play and Paul would play 1 and 2. When Ryan and Paul played number 1 doubles, the Bryans played number 2 doubles and vice versa. And they played equal time at each spot. And they stuck with it all year long. And that team was not only undefeated, but they lost, I think, 2 singles matches the entire year, dual matches. And they were both redeemed later on when they played them at a later date in individual or team play. And we lost 1 doubles point in that entire year. And that was all. 3 matches that entire year. Out of times 24 matches times 6 guys, that's unheard of in college. And that was the most selfless team I've ever had. 20 years apart. One of the most ego-made teams. That team, when we won the NCAA championship in '78, I put a towel over my head sitting on the court. I took a great big breath. Thank God we didn't destroy ourselves. And fast forward 20 years, there's no way these guys were going to lose. They're going to win no matter what. Which is interesting because that was another thing. When I first started coaching, my goal was a national championship. And that was something none of the guys could relate to because we weren't really even very close. And they said, that'll never happen here at Stanford. And I set a goal that was too far up there for them to relate to. So that goal meant nothing to them. It was not a realistic goal. I learned later on that it's not the kind of goal to set. First of all, it wasn't realistic. Secondly, it was too high, too much. And I put so much pressure on my guys by saying, okay, guys, we got to win this match today because we win this match, then we're positioned to this tomorrow and next week, and then now, and we're on our way. We're on our way. And finally, in spite of me, we won it with Roscoe and Sandy Mayer at number 2. And we won it. And I go, and I didn't care honestly at the time whether we ever would win it again. But the next year, Sandy, we had a little love triangle on our team, and Sandy had to leave the team because he couldn't face the guy who's his best friend on the team, whose girlfriend he now is engaged with, so to speak. So he quit the team just before the Nationals, and our top player wasn't there. Roscoe had turned pro the year before. All of a sudden, from being number 2 the year before, close number 2, we're poised to win it, odds-on favorite. But now we're dead. I mean, Roscoe didn't come back. My number one guy, who was by then as good as Roscoe, top 10 player in singles and doubles in the world, had just left the team at the end of the year, and changes my doubles, everything around, and yet we won it. And then the next year, the next year we had and I didn't care if we ever won again. I died and gone to heaven, as I told you. But we had the same thing. We had a number one guy who got hurt. Pat Dupre was top 12 player in the world, Wimbledon semifinalist. And Pat, our top 14 player in the world. And he got hurt in the conference championship. He could not play in NCAAs at all. And so he left. He couldn't play. And I had to change all my doubles, everything the last season. And all of a sudden, a guy who was playing number 4 for much of the year, John Whitlinger, 3 and 4, and Chico Hagee was playing number 6 even, became in my top 4 rotating lineup, because you could only play individually that year. 4 players could only enter in singles and 2 in doubles in those times. And they won it. And I got thinking, wait a minute. And I never once at that time on talked much to my team about winning. And I took a lot of pressure off. In fact, in the book, the guys say that there was one thing that really stood out in their mind. The Bryans and a lot of these guys in the second half of my coaching tenure said, Martin Blackman, the coach never mentioned winning to us. It was all about improving and getting better. Pat Dupre said it pretty well. It was about the journey. It was about the focus, the journey. Nick Saviano said that pretty well. And it made a big difference in my coaching. Of course, I had the championship trophies of the tournament, the NCAA. We had no conference tournaments, no conference champion rings or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
NCAA championships, period. In our trophy display room, the meeting room, the team met. So I didn't say anything about it, but it was kind of there. And I don't think after a few years anyone wanted to be on the team that let it down and didn't win one. For 34 years, every guy who played 4 years at Stanford had at least one championship ring. I'm really proud of that.
That's pretty cool.
When I was going to retire, about 10 years before I retired, I said, well, I can go 40 years as long as I can still rate to the guys. And I'll go to 40, or I'm going to stop coaching if after 4 years someone doesn't get that ring. Well, we won in 2000. In 2001, Alex Kim, we had a great team. I never would have been against them. Indian NCAA championship. He was number 1 in the country. And he goes down with bad cramps, and they put a lot of intravenous stuff in him in the training room. Didn't respond. They took him to the hospital again, more intravenous liquids. And in the hospital room, I got there just after the match when he was still there. His brain started to swell. He could have died in the hospital, Alex Kim. And fortunately, he was okay, but he couldn't play the next day. So we lost a match to a good team in the quarterfinals. But the next year, KJ Hippensteel had won the doubles the year before, and my number 1 player, and was ranked 1 in the country in singles. And he got hurt in the conference championship. He couldn't play. So 2001 and 2002, I never would have bet against those teams who were playing at a real high level. When you lose your number 1 guy, who's also number 1 in the country, with almost no time to make any changes in doubles or anything, it's going to be impossible to win the championship. We didn't. We had a chance in 2003. I had 3 guys who were all pretty good: David Martin, Scott Lipsky, Ryan Haviland. They were all good players. But I decided to start with Ryan at number 1, first time ever. He did a pretty good job at 1, but not really great. I want to see how the other guys each had a chance there. So the next 20 matches, I'm going to have each of them split up 10 matches each in succession. And Ryan didn't want to do that. He didn't want Scott play ahead of me, because Scott doesn't work quite as hard. He gets by a lot of matches, but a great player on the Grand Slam and mixed doubles. But Ryan said, if he plays ahead of me, I quit. And he did. We might have won it that year, but that was my chance. If we won any of those years, then I would have made it to 40.
Yeah.
We didn't. So I stopped after 38, and that's why I stopped.
And Bruce, I don't know if you have any other questions. I got one more question for Dick. Do you have any other questions for yourself?
Yeah, just 2 questions, Dick. So one, How important is mentorship to you? Did you reach out to any coaches from any other sports or any other tennis coaches?
That's a good point. I first of all, I knew I was going to be going into coaching my last year in college while I was playing. So I'd watched J.D. Morgan at UCLA, who'd won several championships. I watched George Tolley, maybe the best of them all, at USC when I think he won a total of 10 championships, something like that. I watched them very, very closely and what they did, how they interact with their players. When I was coaching, I would watch other coaches, how they handle their team, what they did in warmups, how they talk to their players during warmups, how they talk to them during a match. In college coaching, you can talk to your player at any time during the match, as long as you don't interrupt the flow or interrupt the player on the other side. And I really watched and I learned all the time from other players. I learned from my players' coaches. Not irregularly. It was not irregular for me to call a coach of a player, a coach I respect of a player who's coming into Stanford and say, "Well, John, what have you been working on with Robbie? And how did you go about it? What was successful? How did you push the right buttons in on this and his forehand or whatever? What do you think I should be working with him on? That kind of stuff." So certainly, I learned from them. I learned from my players. My players had each player is different. Each one has different strengths and weaknesses on the court. Each one has different capabilities physically and mentally. And my job as a coach is to find out the best buttons to push for each player. And you can't just do it on your own. I mean, you always learn from other people. There's no secrets in this game. You learn. I go to clinics. I go to conferences. I speak at them, listen to the other presenters. So there's a lot of ways to learn this game and never stop learning. When you stop listening to other people and then just picking out what seems to work for you, then you're dead.
So one other question. So now that you're done coaching, I know you're still active. You do something with concussion research or something like that?
No, the office space I got after I left, after I retired as emeritus staff member professor, was in a nonprofit working on concussion education, Bruce. And it really interested me. We were doing, at the time, it had been in existence, started with AIDS, HIV, and a gal heading up the nonprofit had worked about 10 years in that space and actually instituted usable concussion education in 82 countries. Some of them had it, but a lot of them UNESCO couldn't penetrate. The Gates Foundation couldn't penetrate effectively. And 82 countries ended up adopting this program. And then she went into the next global health issue, which at the time was concussion. As a big thing 8 years ago. NFL's denying it. We don't have a problem with concussions. No way. See 2 fingers? Yeah. Okay, go again. It's not me to sit down. Come on, teammate, get off the ground. You're being a wuss, And then all of a sudden, that's not the case. And so she figured she developed some science-based concussion education, and I joined there the second year, and it was fascinating to me. So you're check on the studies and develop curriculum for youths or coaches, parents, clinics, doctors. We had physicians coming asking us to develop curriculum they could use to train the medical school students and concussion. We asked clinics wanted to use our stuff. So it's been fascinating for me. It's all free. We give it away free. It's used by 25 Olympic sports now. Everything from USA Hockey, USA Baseball, to Taekwondo, to rugby, to name it. We're a lot of sports, but we have a lot of them. Internationally, British Taekwondo, hockey for several women's hockey leagues in Canada, Australian rugby. It's used worldwide and it's free. And now we have it set up so you can just go to our website and pick out the program that's best for you. You can certify people for it, and it's really widely acclaimed and widely used. We've done about what we can do in that now.
Yeah,
Nice.
That's really cool. And one last question from me before we wrap up. Is there any shout outs that you would like to send out or send out into the world that you have, Dick?
Well, I think most of all, we're all involved in just a great sport, and it's made sport by people like you, Isaac, Bruce. I can't say enough about, who are really dedicated to sharing the experiences they've had with tennis with people who have an interest in it or helping them develop an interest in it. And we all benefit health-wise Studies have shown mental health and physical health by playing tennis. It's a great sport, and it's our job to bring it to others and help other people as they learn to teach and encourage them to go into the profession. It's a great profession. And anyone who's lucky enough to be a college coach, of course, college coaching is changing right now very fast in any sport. And it's a little different world than it was right now with unlimited transfers and NIL money, but that's a whole nother subject, but not a pretty one, frankly. But I think now, if you think of Eagles before, now athletes are starting to be really entitled, feel entitled. And that's not settling very well with me, the concept of it. So, and there's no end in sight what's going to happen. So we'll see. But I think mostly enjoy the sport as a spectator, as a player, and think of it as a great opportunity if you're lucky enough to be involved as coaches as we are, teachers, proving yourself to the point where you can really give something back to the game and to other people. That's the whole point. That's what a good teacher does.
And thank you so much for coming on. And I gotta blame my sources online for thinking that you coach both men and women. You caught me off guard, but that was definitely like an online search where that came up. So I don't know how they got that.
It's really funny because my wife in Title IX, Ann was the coach of the first women's team at Stanford to win a national championship.
Okay.
And she was second in 4 years. She was second 3 times and won the champion 1 time. So that's a pretty good record for her.
So, anyways, thank you so much for coming on.
And she says I can never coach a women's team. So that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, there we go. But appreciate
my pleasure, Isaac. Good luck to you. Keep up the great work. And Bruce, thanks for putting us in touch.
Great to see you, Dick.
Working with you.